Hi. Today I just wanted to continue with the from my first birth over into my second birth because each of my pregnancies and labors have been completely different. And I'm in my daughter's room again, and I have the baby on the floor, so I have everything up off the floor, so it's just a weird angle. But yeah. So my first one, as I mentioned in the other video, was just really traumatic, and it was just kind of one of those things that you think, oh my gosh, how can I ever do that again? But we were lucky enough with the second one that we planned this one, and it only took 2 cycles after, excuse me, after having my period back, because I didn't have it for about a year and a half after I had Asacia, because I was breastfeeding like on demand all the time. And so I was pretty lucky that just after 2 cycles we ended up getting pregnant, and the pregnancy was fine. Like, I was nowhere near as sick as I was for the first one, because for the first one I thought I was dying. I actually didn't know I was pregnant. um, so then I ended up getting, for my first one, my midwife that we met towards the end, she was just not, I was not happy with her. It was just not a good situation, and she was just horrible during the labor, everything. So we went with a different midwife, and this time I was like, oh, this will be fun. This will be good. But like, we get to know her and all this other stuff, and we had some nice chats, and she seemed really lovely. And so my plan was to have a water birth at the hospital because the first one went so like dangerous that it was probably just smarter to have something at the hospital. So she said to me, which was something that is kind of not good now hearing it, but at the time I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's normal. She said, if you go into labor, if your waters break anywhere between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., don't call me. Just take a note of what time and what color the waters are and what time it happens, and then just call me after 7 and sleep through the contractions. I was like, oh, okay. Can people do that? Um, I didn't know, but okay, yeah, sure. So, of course, 1:10 in the morning, my waters break. She was due November 4th, and this is November 3rd. And so I say to my husband, I'm like, okay, well, 1:10, don't call her. And then all of a sudden I started feeling contractions, and I was like, oh, far out. How do people sleep through these things? And then it started to get more intense. And so he called his mom to have her come over and just to watch our oldest daughter. And it was getting to this point, like, she's like, well, you need to call the midwife and tell her. So I called the midwife, and she was not happy that I called her. She was a bit annoyed. And she's like, oh, well, just sleep through the contractions. And I was like, okay. So then it just kept getting more intense to the point where I couldn't breathe. And my mother in law was like, nah, you need to call her again. And so she was more annoyed, and she was just like, oh, fine, I'll just come to see you at the house, which she was like an hour away. And I was like, well, okay. But then it got to the point where my mother in law was like, no, just go to the hospital, tell her you'll meet her there. So I get to the hospital, and by the time I get to the hospital, I'm already like 8.5 centimeters dilated. And I was just like, oh my God, I want an epidural, because it was such a new experience to me compared to my last one, because I didn't know what an actual like normal labor was feeling like. So I just feeling like I needed to push. But then she was telling me that, oh, it's too late to get into the water, but oh, and it's too late to have an epidural. You're fine, and you're this and that and everything. And so I ended up going to the hospital at 2:30, 8.5 centimeters, and having Ida at 5:58 a.m. that day. And then after that, and no tearing, nothing. It came out, it was awesome. Then after that, she comes to me and says, oh, well, you need to make sure that you do a pee because we need the room. Because when I got there, there was nobody there. But as I was leaving, or as I gave birth, like, apparently the hospital was getting full. So she kept kind of hounding me to make sure that I could do a pee just so that I could leave. And I was out of the hospital by like 10:30. I had just given birth, and they told me to leave because they needed the room. And so we were going to stay in the birthing center again, but just for one day. And we ended up going. And my mother-in-law was um, watching our oldest daughter, and it was the first time I'd ever been away from Asacia. But I mean, like, a whole bunch of things were going through my mind, but at the same time, like, it wasn't just a good, nice transition experience either, because my mother-in-law was just kind of not really keen on watching Asacia. She's always, like, his family has not been overly super supportive or anything, and we've always kind of had to do a lot of stuff on our own. But that's kind of like took the joy out of it for me, because she was more in a rush of like, okay, like, when are you going to be ready that you can take Asacia back and everything. I mean, like, that's how I felt at the time and everything. Um, so eventually, when we got Ida and Asasia together, it was just magical because Asasia, like before she was born, like I swear they asked her, "What would you like to be on Earth? Like, what's one of the many things you like to be?" And she says, "I would love to be a big sister," because she is just amazing, and they've had such a great connection, and she was always so great and so amazing with her. And even though Ida has her challenges and she's very tricky to kind of work well with, like Asasia is just amazing with her. So yeah, I've been very lucky in that aspect. So yeah, second birth was good compared to the first one, but there were still some things that weren't that amazing. So yep, that's number two.